Hi everyone, and welcome to my next video tutorial, which is going to be focused on provisioning a database instance by utilizing RDS. RDS stands for Relational Database Service, and it's used for provisioning relational databases such as a MySQL database, a Postgres database, etc. So let's go ahead and get started. So you want to ensure that you search for RDS. You can just type that in and automatically it will auto-complete to show the following service, namely RDS, which stands for Managed Relational Database Service for the full name. So we can go ahead and click on this particular service. Okay, let's just give it a moment to load the dashboard. Okay. And we'll get a few notifications here. So all that you want to do is you can just go ahead and close these. And what I always like to do is click here on DB instances under this resources table. So you want to click on DB instances. So essentially speaking, we'll be creating a database instance. Now, just to make this more breathable and ensure that there's sufficient room, I just want to close this info panel. So this here on the left is our info panel. And we'll occasionally get notification messages, so I'm just going to close that. Great, so as you can see, we have 0 databases. So what we want to do is we want to say create database. Okay, so what's going to happen is AWS here will launch up the setup wizard for creating a database. So we just need to be a little bit patient here. So I just want to wait a little bit. You can see here by the size of the scroll bar minimizing, you can get a clear indication of everything just being loaded on the page itself. Okay, so as you can see, we have 2 options to create our database. So we need to choose the database creation method. Now, you can either choose standard create, which is the default. So here you're going to set all of the configuration options, including those for availability, security, backups, and maintenance. Then we also get the alternative database creation method known as easy create. So this is recommended if you want to quickly set up your database without having to worry about all of the intricate details. So I want to go a little bit deeper, just a tad bit. So we're going to go with standard create, so the default. Then we can scroll down and we can see a list of engine options. So which database engine you would like to utilize. So we have Aurora and we have another instance of Aurora based on Postgres and the initial one on MySQL. So you can decide which engine you'd like to use. We also have the standard MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and IBM DB2. So you can decide which one you would prefer. Now, just a bit of advice here. So Aurora is proprietary software. So this is going to cost a little bit more money than the traditional database engines. So what I always like to go for is Postgres. So I'm going to select Postgres in this example. Okay, you can close that info panel and let's scroll down. All right, so we've got that all set up. Now, the next thing that you want to do is choose an engine. Now, if you're already familiar with databases, you may have a particular engine in mind that you would prefer. So if you want to change it, you can click on the drop down here. And it's going to give you various options to choose from. So I'm going to leave it on the default on a Postgres 16.1-R2 engine version. Next, you want to set up the template. So the template is going to be sampled based on the type that you select. So we have production, dev and test, and we have free tier. Now, if you are still in the free tier, what you can do is utilize that. If, however, you're fine with paying some money, then I would suggest using dev and test and only use production if you're comfortable with utilizing RDS and you know what's going on. So what I'd recommend you do if this is your first time using AWS, I would suggest choosing the free tier. If you've used AWS before and you're a bit more comfortable, you have a project that you want to test regularly, then I would choose dev and test. However, if you are comfortable, you've used the service before, then dive right in with production. So I'm going to go with free tier. Okay, and that's going to significantly change my options. So we can see here we won't have a say in terms of availability and durability. So if we want to set up a multi-AZ database instance, or if we want to set up our snapshots or anything of the sort, we won't be able to do so with the free tier. But that's fine. Let's keep this simple. Next, under settings, you want to give your database instance a name here. So this is the name that you're going to see your database be referred to as in RDS. So you can change this as you wish. I'm going to change it actually. So I'm just going to change this to my first DB instance. Yeah, you can give it any name that you desire. So this is the identifier. Next, you want to set up your credentials. Now, assuming that you have an application and you are a developer yourself, or you're working with developers, you're going to have to keep note here of the credentials and make sure you write it down or save it somewhere. So first, you would define your username. So I'm just going to keep it as, let's change this name. I'm going to call this OnoGB as my master username. You can decide what you want to refer to this as. For those of you with experience with AWS Secret Manager, you can also manage your master credentials with Secret Manager as well. And in that case, what's going to happen is RDS will be merged with AWS Secrets Manager, and RDS will then be able to generate a password for you and manage it throughout its lifecycle in Secrets Manager. Right, so here we can enter in our password. You can also select auto generate password if you don't want to put one in. So in our case, I'm going to add in a password. And again, like I said, make sure you keep notes of all this important information if you're a developer or you're working on a project with developers, etc. So I'm going to do so. And I'm going to confirm it. There we go. All right, so we've got that set. Next, under instance configuration, you want to decide the size of your instance and which particular database instance you want to choose. If you've used the EC2 service before, this will be very familiar to you in a like. So when you set up your EC2 instances, you decide what your instance size will be. We have a similar thing here with our databases as well. So we need to choose an instance size. Now, in the free tier, it's recommended to go with the T3 micro instance. This is a small one and it's perfect for testing. As you can see, if you click on the drop down, you can see that there are other versions, but none of these would be available to us since we're using the free tier. So it's best to choose the smallest possible. If, however, like I said, you are experienced or have some experience with databases, you can choose a larger instance and change the number of vCPUs, the gig RAM, and the networking speed. Okay. Next, under storage, we're going to keep the storage type on the default, so general purpose SSD. The allocated storage will leave at the minimum of 20 gig. We can take a further look at storage auto scaling. So by default, we're going to see that auto scaling is already set for us here. So essentially what's going to happen here is auto scaling is if our database reaches a particular storage level and our application is still running and we're still getting users signing up, for example, to our website or application, and we need more data to be stored in storage, what's going to happen is AWS will allow us to store more in terms of the data for our application. So it's going to automatically scale our storage for us, and there is a maximum threshold to keep in mind here. So in our case, it is set to 1,000. And our allocated storage is 20. So you can see how that would phase into account. Right, under connectivity, we're not going to connect this database to an EC2 resource. We're just going to say don't connect. We want to keep this separate, so our database is solely part of RDS. We're going to use the default VPC, so whatever you see there, you can leave it as is. We're going to use the default subnet. We can leave that as is. An important thing to ensure is that you grant public access to your database so that you'll be able to generate an endpoint which you can connect with your application. So very important to ensure that you enable public access. Next, under VPC security group, we are just going to go ahead and choose an existing VPC security group and use a default one that is given to us. Under availability zone, we can specifically choose an availability zone here. So as you can see, I'm set to Ohio here, so I can choose 2A, B, or C, but it's best to just let RDS decide for you. You're more than welcome to create a proxy if you want to attach that to your RDS database instance. Okay, under certificate authority, we're going to leave it on the default. Under additional configuration, keep in mind the port number. This is something that you may need to reference. So in our case, it is port 5432. That's typically for databases generated with a Postgres database engine. Okay, under database authentication, as we are aware, we will be able to get access to our database using password authentication. So if you recall earlier, when we set our master password, we set that up for password authentication. By default, we're going to have some basic monitoring enabled here in terms of performance insights to see the performance of our database. You can go ahead and set up additional configuration here if you want to have enhanced monitoring here to see a little bit more detail in terms of metrics for how processing and various processes and threads use the CPU. And additionally, there are additional configuration settings that you can set here. I'd recommend that you click on this here. And now you need to give your database a name. This is very important. So under initial database name here, I'm going to say prod database. So this is something that you will typically reference in your application as well. So make sure you take a note of your database name. Initially, in the beginning, we set up our master username and password. Now it's the database name here. Very important that you keep this into mind. Okay, we can just see that we will allow automated backups for our database. We can also set up a backup window, set up a replication. By default, we have encryption set to our database. And we are going to enable auto minor version upgrades accordingly as the database runs. Okay, so that's it. That's all that we need to do here. So just keep track of everything that I set up. And here under monthly costs, now you're probably wondering, hey, this was the free tier. So what happens is if your free tier expires, you can still utilize the free tier for the T3 micro database. So let's look at the database that we used. There we go. So for this database, you can still use it under the free tier as the template. However, if your free tier expires, you're then going to be charged a fee. Now, this fee is not going to be that much. So as you can see, my monthly cost is $15 for that database. But if you're in the free tier and you haven't used AWS longer for a year, then you're not going to get this message. It's going to be free for you completely up to a certain usage in terms of resource limits. So just keep that in mind, very important. Okay, so what we can do now is scroll down, just make sure you're happy with everything and all the details. And if you are happy with everything and the monthly costs, you can scroll down and say create database. Okay, so we just need to be patient. It does take a while. I believe it takes 15 to 20 minutes. Now you may see this pop-up come up. So all you need to do is say hide add-on here for 30 days and close. Let's close the info panel. And we can see our database is being created. So you can see the identifier that we set was my first DB instance. So this is what was being referred to accordingly there. Now, I hope you kept in mind all those other details. Those details you'll need to refer in your application accordingly. All right, so our database is being created. So all we need to do now is be patient and wait for it to be created. I'd recommend that you wait for the status to turn green and to ensure that your database is available as well. So let's just give it some time. Like I said, it can take up to 15 to 20 minutes for our database to be generated. So let's just be a little bit patient. All right, so welcome back. So as you can see, our database was successfully created. We can see a green notification message, and we can also see the status for this database is available. So make sure that you can see this green check mark and that it is available, your database, and that you got this notification message. Now, something important that I feel you should all be aware of is the database endpoint. Now, since we are enabling public access to connect to our database, we need to ensure that we are aware of the endpoint which we should add in our application. So you can click on DB identifier here, so your database. instance. And what you can do is, if you scroll down here, under this default connectivity and security table here, you'll see that there is an endpoint. Now, this endpoint you should add into your application, okay, as a means for connecting to this database, along with the password, the username, the port, etc. Now, sometimes this is known as the host. In other words, this is the host connection endpoint, or it's sometimes just commonly referred to as endpoint. Now, the next thing that you need to do is you need to configure your security group so that you'll have access to your database from whichever application you have, whether it's a Django application, if it's an application based in Flask, etc. You need to make sure that you have access to your database via the security groups. So here we can see we have a default security group associated with our database. So what we can do is right click and open this in a new tab. So let's just wait for that to load up, and it's going to take you straight to EC2. So let's go straight there. And it's going to load up a list of security groups here. So all we need to do is we need to be patient. And as you can see, here is the security group. So I just want to double check. Yep, that's the one. So what you want to do is you want to click on that security group that you have. This is the default security group, should I rather say. Then you can scroll down and you can see that we have our inbound rules here. So you can say edit inbound rules. Okay. And sometimes by default, it's automatically going to configure the inbound rules to connect to your Postgres database already via all IPv4 and IPv6 addresses by default. This all traffic inbound rule here is by default. This is what's going to be set for every security group that you create in AWS. But let's say and assume that these Postgres inbound rules here weren't created for you. I'm going to show you how you can create them. So I'm just going to say delete this Postgres one here. Don't delete this here, all traffic. And you can delete this Postgres one here. So in case it's not created for you, you can say add rule. And we want to click on this drop down, and you want to look for Postgres. So you can just put in post, and here it is. The port range, as you can see, is 5432, and we want to allow all IPv4 addresses to be able to connect to our Postgres database. So it will be designated by the following CIDR block for all IPv4 addresses. Then you want to add another rule for Postgres as well. And then you want to allow all IPv6 addresses to connect to your Postgres database. So you can look for the following CIDR block, which designates IPv6 addresses. Okay, so make sure you've got the following rules in place here. These are known as inbound rules, as you can see here, and that you have your default all traffic rule already set as is. If you're happy with that, you can save these rules. Okay, and that will be applied to this security group here by the following identifier, which will match the identifier here in this table, which pertains to our database instance here accordingly. And we can close this tab now, and we are good to go. Now, the rest of the configuration here, if we head onto our databases, the rest of the configuration is going to be on your application side. Now, you have all the information already configured in the setup wizard, such as the master username, password, port number, database name. You even have the endpoint, which I just referred to as right here. You've got everything set up in your security group. So everything in the cloud in terms of access to your database is all set up and ready to go. The last thing that remains is just configuring the minor details in your application, and you'll be connected to your database instance, specifically based on a Postgres engine type. All right, so that's it on how to create a Postgres database. Now, if you want to know how to delete it, this is quite an important thing to know. You can just go ahead and click here on the radio button here. You can go to actions, and you'll see you'll get various options here. So all you need to do is say delete. And you just want to ensure that you uncheck create final snapshot and uncheck retain automated backups. You want to acknowledge that you understand that everything will be deleted. And then you just want to type delete me in here and say delete. And you can see the process is being undertaken. So your database instance, the status is deleting, and it's going to be deleted. Now this again also takes maybe 10-15 minutes, so you need to be patient. But this is how you can delete your database instances with RDS. Alright guys, so that's it for this video tutorial. It was quite long, but of course you have now a clearer idea and understanding of how you can provision your database instances in the RDS service, which stands for Relational Database Service in AWS. Alright guys, so that's it, and thank you for watching this video, and thank you for the support, and I'll see you next time. Bye.